Andy Wacker, it's great to finally have you on the Single Track podcast.
Nice to be here.
A lot of cool stuff to cover in this conversation. I think you have pretty significant name recognition in the sport, but for folks that aren't familiar with you, can you give a quick elevator description of your background, like how you got involved, what you specialize in, and where you're at now in terms of career?
Yeah, sure. I am a pro trail and sometimes road runner for Salomon right now. I've been on 17, I think, US teams, and I ran at the University of Colorado. So kind of have a little background doing a little bit of everything, doing track and cross country and you name it with running.
One of the cool things about you is, one of the many cool things is you've seemingly kept tabs on what it takes to be a pro runner in the sport, what it takes to be successful from like a career standpoint. And I think it would be, before we get to what you've recently created, I think it'd be interesting to paint a picture of what the opportunities looked like for you when you were first coming into the sport, trying to be a pro runner. So can you paint that picture and talk about like what was available to you, what you could expect, what like the traditional path was?
Yeah, so for me, just graduating from the University of Colorado, it seemed kind of like an all or nothing thing. I felt like there wasn't a lot of middle ground. So the people I knew were like Jenny Simpson, who is like, of course, she's like a, NCAA record holder, so she's getting a track contract. Or you're like quitting the sport. So I knew I wanted to keep running. I knew that I wasn't an NCAA champion and that I didn't really know where to go from there. So I think kind of one thing that always sticks in my mind was, so one, I was like track focused. I was like, I'm going to run the 5K on the track. And at the time I'd run 13:41, which I thought was pretty good. And I remember talking to an agent and being like, what do I need to run this year to like get a contract? Like, what if I run 13:15, which was like out of my mind. I was like, there's no way I'll run this, but I'll just like ask. And he's like, you still won't get sponsored. And I was like, oh, okay.
How about from like a trail standpoint though? Like when you were having that same conversation with the agent, did you talk about any like key performance indicators for what it would take to do something similar in the trail scene?
Not at all. Like it wasn't even like, the funny thing is I grew up in North Carolina playing in the sticks, and here in CU, in Boulder, Colorado, there's mountains, and I was running up 14ers over the summer. And it just like it was not even really on my radar that trail running would be like a viable option. So it was basically do track and maybe you can try out road running, and like I didn't even know what existed and where to go at all. So I was lost, to be honest.
What eventually became your entry point? Like I'm guessing you're dabbling in this stuff on the road and on the track, and at some point there's a race or two that comes on your radar, or you just meet the right people. What did that look like?
Yeah, so I think a lot of people, especially I've been having so many conversations recently with friends in the trail community, but I think a lot of people just stumble into the trails. And my experience was similar in some ways because one piece was like I was roommates with this guy at CU named Christian Thompson, and he had been on the junior mountain running team. So when he was in high school, he ran on the team, I think 2 times, like in Italy or something like that. And so I remember like when we were roommates, I was like, what are you talking about? Like, what's mountain running? So that was like in the back of my mind. And so my first year as a pro, I was starting to do just a few different types of races to see what I wanted to do. So it was mostly like very much like track focused. And then I was like, okay, I'm going to try to do one of the USATF road champs. So I did like the road half champs in the first like 6 months after I graduated. And then I think it might have been a whole year later, the next summer, so a full year after being out of college, that I did the US mountain running champs, because it was just on the list of US championships. It was like, here's the road half. Oh, and luckily like on the same calendar as the mountain champs. And I was like, oh, that sounds familiar. That's like what Christian Thompson did like 6 years ago. So I tried it out. And that was like one of the entry points, I guess, was doing that race and being like, oh, this is like super hard.
I have 2 questions off that. The first, is it the case that the U.S. is unique, where athletes like yourself, quote unquote, stumble across a sport? Is that something that happens in all cultures across the world, whether you're in Spain and France or the US? Or is this a unique problem to the US where like your chances of becoming a trail athlete are largely like serendipitous?
Yeah, I think in the US it is more like that than it is in other countries. And I think we can talk about like way more about that. But I think, for example, that like if you're in Italy, they like love mountain running. And so there's like kind of two pieces. One, like they have this cultural identity that this is our sport. Like we honor and like love these athletes. And then the second piece is like their organizational structure is so different than ours. And different isn't better or worse, it's just different. And so what I mean by that is like they have club teams that develop trail runners from like birth until they're pros, and they can be part of that same club. You know, if you're like from Milan, you're like part of the same Milan running club or whatever from youth until you're a pro. Where we have in the US, like everyone's aware, we have this amazing, like every high school has like a really awesome sports structure.
Yeah.
Every college has like a lot of amazing organization for sports. And then the second you graduate from college, there's like almost nothing, especially at like a pro trail level. There's like there's no teams, there's no structure. So I think that's kind of like, yes, other countries have a more continuous, just like easier path, and we just have this big weird thing that we have to overcome.
I took a note. You mentioned this in the website, and I took a note for this conversation. I think you say that the U.S. is, like you said, a leader in developing talent pipeline from the youth level through college, but we fall short at the pro level. What's your thesis for why this drop off occurs? I'm sure it's multifaceted, but what's your opinion here?
Yeah, and just to like be really specific on that, because it's hard to capture everything in like the website, but we do such a good job of getting track and cross country runners. Like we're saying, like every high school has like a track and cross country team. Every college, or not every college, but probably most colleges have a track and cross country team. And like quick side note, I remember Mark Wetmore, the coach at CU, very clearly being like, women's cross country is the most competitive sport in the country. And that's because every single NCAA school has women's cross country. And so there's just like so many athletes doing it. So like the structure's there. But to kind of clearly answer that question, I think like why is there a drop off after college? I think there's probably like two or three pieces. Like one piece is structure that we were just talking about. Like there are teams at high school and college level. There are not teams, especially for trail, after that. There's like barely any club teams. I think along that kind of what we were just saying is like structurally, there's this development pipeline to become better and better and better and more professionalized in high school and college. And then when you get out of college as any type of runner, it's like a totally different experience, because which is really cool, but really different. And a really drastic thing is that like marathon running isn't just for pros. It's a mass participation event. And so like adapting to a mass participation event style versus this thing where you were like funneled because you're the best is like definitely a big change for a lot of those athletes, including myself. Yeah. And then, sorry, I know that's kind of like long winded, but so like the structure piece, the structure piece is huge. And then I think that the other piece is like, it's probably like, just like one easy thing is that like a small percentage of really good high school runners go on to become really good college runners. And then only a small percentage of those really good college runners go on to become pro athletes as road, track, trail, cross country. And so you're just narrowing down the best of the best of the best. So kind of just naturally, I think there's less people moving on to that next stage.
I was going to say, and maybe we can talk about it a little later in the conversation, but to me, and probably to you and what you're doing with this trail team, which we'll describe in a second, there's such an amazing opportunity to capture with, I don't want to say like second tier, but anybody that can't quite hack it at like the truly elite distances on the road and the trackside, they can be recruited, right? There should be a way to recruit those people to continue their running careers in the trails in some capacity. And I know a lot of folks will disagree that like it's not a given that people with that talent will immediately translate well into our world, but I think it's totally worth exploring.
Yeah, and I think like my message would be to anyone, this is why I'm so passionate about this, is that if you are a good young runner, like it isn't either or. It isn't like you're the making your livelihood off running or you need to quit. I think there's a lot of in the middle, and that's for all types of running. And I think that hopefully we can send that message for trail running and be like, this is a great thing that you could do with a full-time job, with a family. And it's still awesome as long as you love doing it. Like you should do it.
A couple more, and I don't want to bury the lead, but I have a couple more questions just to set the table. You've been in the sport now for over a decade at this point. Has much changed, in your opinion, in terms of the pathways and opportunities available to athletes that are like just getting out of college and expressing interest in our sport and making sense of just like what's out there from like a sponsorship standpoint or how to construct a media presence, all that kind of stuff?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. So like a ton of things have happened. I think the exciting thing that we should all just be like grateful for is that trail running is growing and just normal people are doing it. And that's really exciting. So the sport's getting bigger and bigger. There's more races, there's more people doing it, and there's different distances. And I think that that's exciting. So trail running's growing. I think from an elite athlete perspective, things have definitely changed, which is exciting because kind of going back to that story of like when I was in college, like, oh, like what would I need to run in the 5K? So when I think I was like a sophomore in college, I remember being like, oh, if I break 14 on the track, like I'll be a pro runner. That was like what I thought. Definitely believed that. And at the time it was pretty much true because so few people had run, 13 something in the 5K. And then literally those years that I was in college, all of a sudden I was a junior in college and I was at the University of Washington indoor and I was one of like 50 people, 50 guys breaking 14 in the 5K. So it wasn't that, which is awesome. Like this wave of good athletes and people getting like good training and good advice and like being excited about running was coming into the US. And I think that's accelerating even now. So I think there's even more people, like the talent pool is bigger and bigger, like more people are running. And then with that, I think like there's a couple things too. Like the story for me is when I joined the sport, it was Max King and Joe Gray. And those guys are awesome. And they're also crossover athletes. They were doing roads and track. They were doing it all. But then I think things started to change maybe right after I got into trail running because all of a sudden there's like, I think a big moment for me was like Hayden Hawks. Hayden Hawks is like entering the sport and he graduates Southern Utah and he says, I could do whatever I want. I could do roads for sure. He could be a great road runner immediately. And he's like, no, I'm going to do trail. And so I think like he was like the first big example of someone like that for me. And then you see people like Grayson Murphy, who's like, not only can I do trail right when I leave college if I want, I can balance doing trail and road. Maybe it took a year out of college, but soon out of college. And so I think like these examples are starting to show up. And with like the rise of social media, people are able to see that that's a pathway for them.
It makes me think, and I'm sorry, this is kind of off the cuff, but you mentioned Hayden Hawks like explicitly saying, I'm going to go do trail. Mm-hmm. How far away are we, in your estimation, from a world where the default among top collegiate athletes is to think trail, to go to trail instead of like competing for, an Olympic spot in the 5K or the 10K or to do the Diamond League, stuff like that? Is that even something worth considering right now?
Yeah, I don't know. Like the word default, that's interesting because that's saying like, it's bigger than track and road. I don't know. I don't foresee that in the future. Maybe I should because it could be exciting. But I do think in the very near future that there's going to be a huge chunk of NCAA athletes who say like, that's the pathway I want to go. That looks more exciting to me. That's my personality and that's who I am. And I'm not a track athlete. And so I think that's exciting to me. It's more that maybe not the majority, but some group, some critical mass of athletes is going to do that. It's here. It's coming right now.
Right on. One more thing I want to mentioned from the website, you say that we can make U.S. trail runners the best in the world, in part through this project that we're going to describe in just a minute.
Mm-hmm.
In your estimation, how big is the talent gap across countries, across regions? Like if you're comparing the American contingent to runners over in Europe, like in an arena like the Golden Trail Series, you've been there. Like how big is the talent gap? And is this something that we can close in a number of years rather than like decades, for example?
Oh yeah. I don't think there's a gap actually. So I think like the US has incredible athletes. Like I was thinking today, if you had Sophia Lockley, Allie Mack, and Grayson Murphy do an uphill race, like the world might just explode. Like it's too many good uphillers. It's insane. Like our talent level at
Yes.
the high end is ridiculous. Our talent of up and coming runners, like I was saying, is getting like when I was in college 10 years ago, it was all of a sudden this wave of people, high schoolers breaking 4 in the mile and people breaking 14 in the 5K. And now it's accelerated even more. So I think like it's not that we have a talent gap. I think it's that we are missing this little tiny piece that's a connection that says, here's these examples that are amazing and the top end athletes are great. Here's this talent pool. How do we bridge that gap? Because I think that there's a lot of future Joe Grays and Grayson Murphys and Adam Petermans and Hayden Hawks, like they're there. We just need to give them a little nudge and they're going to be just showing what our country has, which is an incredible talent level in running.
We just had Dan Kurtz on the show a couple days ago. I think he's another rising star. I think his future, his stock is super bright.
Totally agree. Yeah. Ran with Dan, ran against Dan a couple times this year, ran with him on a US team. And he's such a strong athlete. And again, like he's that example of the future, like someone who can run 13:30 in the 5K and then chooses to do trail, and you can do it all. Like there's so much talent. And yeah, hopefully these guys are going to all be kicking my butt in the next few years. I'm looking forward to it.
Well, I've buried the lead long enough. As I mentioned earlier in the show, as you described, you've had this long, successful career in the sport. You've worn a lot of hats for a lot of different organizations. You've lived the pro experience. Can you talk about how all of that has culminated into this new project you have and what it's all about?
Yeah, sure. And this is like amazing because I think maybe a lot of people feel this way, but I've been doing so many things in my life, and sometimes it seems like, why am I doing this random thing? And this is like the first time where I'm like, oh, all my skills are coming together finally. So the last month has just seemed perfect. But basically, yeah. So I've started this thing called the Trail Team. What that is basically something that is going to help do what we just were talking about, match these extremely elite, amazing athletes who are already established in the sport with 6 up and coming athletes, and help them just bridge that gap from maybe it's NCAA running or skiing, to be able to compete at the highest level in the world in trail running. And so, yeah, how do I come into play with that? I think that I'm an organizer. I think that I have these connections. I know the elite athletes. I know some of these up and comers. Hopefully, I'm going to find out a lot more and inspire a lot of new younger athletes to see what we're doing and give them a roadmap for the future. Because I think that is a challenge for a lot of young athletes, is that they don't know how to get from A to B. And so that's what we're trying to do.
On the website, you list out the services as mentorship, skill development, and media exposure. And I think it'd be good to walk through each of these things. And we can also talk about like how you're going to be recruiting athletes and the mentors that are involved and stuff. But starting with mentorship, what do you mean by that? Can you clarify like what that means and what the value proposition is there?
Yeah, definitely. So where this came from, by the way, is I had an idea, like I think it's probably started 5 years ago, of like that this needs to happen, that there's a gap from for young, essentially post-collegiate athletes getting into trails. And so I've been talking to tons of young athletes to be like, I think this is what you want. What do you tell me? What do you want? And what I'm hearing is that like, maybe you already have a coach, maybe you've already trained with your NCAA team, or maybe you're training in some small group of friends in your hometown. But the one thing you don't have is someone who is like trail specific. So I'm thinking like, I mean, Grayson Murphy's such a perfect example of this, but like
Yeah, yeah.
you're like, if you're a young woman who ran track in the NCAA and you want to run trails, she could be a person who you could get on a phone call with once a month and say like, how do I design a schedule that track running and trail running will make sense this year? How can I make sure I like plan breaks? How do I get into the races? What races do I need to do? Like which ones are important? How do I navigate getting sponsored as a trail athlete? Do I need to be sponsored as a trail athlete or track athlete?
Mm.
And there's so many of these questions and conversations that come up that I think having someone who you want to be in the future. So I'm just calling that a mentor, but like, who do these young athletes want to be in 5 years? Like, let's connect those people so that they can get those questions answered and find out what questions they don't even know to ask.
How about skill development?
Yeah, so skill development's probably an easy one. I think like Dan Kurtz is a great example. Like he's so fit, he's so talented, he's been training hard for a lot of years, but as being someone who's been in trail running specifically for basically 1 year, I think that trail running is unique in running is that you have to have trail skills. Like it's not just fitness, like you need to be able to run downhill, you need to be able to understand like nutrition, like all these other pieces. So I think there's the complexity of terrain um, and the just like skill aspect in terms of moving over weird trail and rock and mud and those kind of things. And so hopefully what that looks like is we're going to have trail camps, like training camps, and that would be for these 6 athletes that are selected for the team. So kind of my vision, there's 2 visions because I had mine in mind, and I think we're going to do that. But we also, after talking to young athletes, I kind of have a different idea too. So the first one is like, imagine getting these 6 athletes and mentors together in like Moab for like a long weekend or a week where we're just like hanging out, being able to like just share what we know in the sport, and then going down some gnarly trail, learning how to run downhill better. So just sharing that knowledge and starting that pathway to skill development. And then the second piece with those trail camps would be something like, let's train together for a month to get ready for a high altitude race. So it's not just this short little photo shoot and look at a trail for the first time ever. It's like, let's dig deep and kind of do this more professionalized version that's, a team like Bowerman Elite or someone like has been doing in other sides of running.
So this team won't be co-located, but there will be a fair number of opportunities to get together on an annual basis.
Totally. Yeah, exactly. So I think just the easiest way with being a small startup grassroots operation and the nature of the athletes that we have in trail, I think that, yeah, we need to have people should be able to live where they want. If they want to live where I live in Boulder, Colorado, that's great. But if they don't, that's okay. And the main thing is let's get together for training camps, both short week-long ones and longer times when people can get acclimated to altitude or something, as well as meeting up at goal races. So just having that community piece is really important to me, and saying, let's like, don't be nervous. Like we're all going to be at whatever Broken Arrow together. Let's get like rent an Airbnb so you have a space, and let's like make sure you're prepared and ready to go. And that's part of that community building piece.
The last piece on the site is media exposure. So that to me can mean a lot of things. When I first saw it, I thought like, oh, is Andy and the team teaching people how to, work the Instagram algorithm or how to be a guest on a podcast? So talk about what's involved there.
Yeah. So right off, like for sure, I think it is important for athletes to have a brand. So I think again, like people like Grayson do this really well. And so like definitely making sure that those athletes know like, hey, if you want to get a good sponsorship, for better or worse, that's part of our sport, and knowing how to make your brand awesome and like show who you are and be positive and inspire others. Like I think that's important because that's what we want to do. We want to share our love for trail running. But more maybe beyond that, a kind of the bigger picture is that being a young athlete in sport now, like we have this awesome new time with social media and with advancement in technology where we should be sharing what we're doing. And I think that people love that. So beyond just like social media, I really am looking at like, we need to have photos and videos. We want to have like long form stories to tell, like who are we, like
Yeah.
what are we doing, and how can that set examples to be a roadmap for young athletes that aren't on the team, that aren't the six athletes that are chosen. Because I think that's more important than ever. Like we're saying, we have hundreds and hundreds of these kids developing who are in high school, and we want to be able to show them what we do, and that trail running's a viable option for them in the future. And we want them to be trail runners. So let's show off the beautiful scenery and the hard work and the whole process.
Going back to the organization of the trail team, you're sort of the orchestrator of it. You're the organizer of it. You mentioned Grayson Murphy's name a few times. Can you talk about the people that will be working with you on this to coach the athletes and stuff like that?
For sure, yeah. So we have three mentors, and I'm the fourth one, but it's Grayson Murphy, Adam Peterman, and Allie Mack. And
Cool.
so those are the biggest names in the sport right now. I think any person can probably relate to one of those people, and I think that they're really just great shining stars in our sport. So those are the core team of people that are going to be helping with the trail team. But there's so many other people that aren't going to be named right now and may show up later. But our sport's really cool because of the community. I think that anyone who's been to a trail race knows this. They've seen like if you're competitors during the race, the second you're done with the race, you can be friends. And I think that people are super encouraging. And so I just have a lot of friends and connections in the sport. And I know that those people are, I've been shocked by how many people who've told me that they're willing to help and are really excited about this. So I think we're going to see a much broader community than just those four mentors showing up to help out with the trail team.
Super cool. And you mentioned, you talked about how this is sort of like this is a startup. So is this your baby? Are you doing this full time right now?
Yeah, I am. So it's kind of exciting because I quit my full-time teaching job, and I've been trying to to have all these side hustles to run and do what I want. But this just seems so important to me right now and so needed in our country that I stopped everything that I'm doing, and I've been working night and day on it. And it's awesome because it's like a labor of love, and every minute's been just so encouraging and exciting. And like I said, when you have like your friends reaching out to be like, this is awesome and I want to help, that's just inspiring to me. And I hope that I can share that passion and that community with everyone.
I know it's early days, but what do you anticipate the business model looking like? Because I imagine this might not jive perfectly well with some of the established like trail shoe brands out there. I could be wrong, but maybe talk for a second about how you envision this thing becoming self-sustaining.
Yeah. And one piece right off is that I think there's been a lot of division in the trail community recently. And this is supposed to be the opposite of that. It's supposed to bring people together. I think it's supposed to be an and not an or. It's supposed to be, how can you be inspired by the trail team and be a runner, or whatever that is. And so I don't want to this isn't supposed to exclude anyone.
Yes.
So what the model looks like is the trail team is very shortly going to be a nonprofit. And so that's going to be, that's our vision, and our all along is just to help people. So that matches with that. So we're going to be working with brands, but we're not going to be working with any of the major shoe brands. And that's definitely intentional because we want these 6 young athletes to be able to get sponsorships when they're on the trail team and after the trail team. And we don't want to have any conflicts with that. So we're really looking at there might be corporate sponsors. That would be, partners is probably a better relationship, because I don't think that my vision, like there's never a world in my vision where athletes are posting fake things on social media for someone who's like sponsoring the team. That's not part of our vision. So I'd much rather be independent and removed from those kind of entities, because we want to be authentic. We want to support brands and partners that we like, that align with our values and that really want to build the trail community. But we don't want to be fake and sell out in any way. So we're going to be raising money through, like I said, through our nonprofit status. We'll be looking for donations in the future. And we're going to be working with brands that are welcoming to all different shoe sponsors, at least. So maybe nutrition brands and some other brands that are willing to work. So yeah, those are kind of unnamed right now, and those are going to be ongoing. But anyway, if you are one of those brands and you're listening,
Yes.
reach out to us on trail-team.com, and there's an email link there, and we'd love to talk to you because I think there's a lot of connections we could make.
We've talked about this ad nauseum on the podcast, this idea, this dream of a co-located running team existing in our sport. And I know this is sort of like a halfway point between dispersed and co-located. You'll have a lot of opportunities to come together. I think that in those environments, similar to like a college running environment or what like the Tin Man Elite guys do, or the Bowermans or the Hoka Naz Elites, it's a content marketer's dream probably to be on the ground with something like you're doing at one of these retreats, training for, your next high altitude race or something. Like if I'm a brand out there, this is a total win-win move. So I don't know, it makes sense to me.
Yeah, I think so too. So I'm really excited about that. I think that's like the future too. I think the trail team again now is starting very small with 6 athletes and mentors coming together. But I'm definitely hearing that everyone, elite athletes and not elite athletes, want to have that community. They want to come together. So moving forward, we're looking forward to making as many of those opportunities as possible for people to meet up and train and go on runs together.
I do want to play, and again, I'll say this with the caveat that I think that what you're offering in terms of filling the gap of mentorship, skill development, media exposure, it totally makes sense. I think with a few exceptions, it's been an unmet need in our sport. But again, to play devil's advocate, why don't you think brands like Salomon, Hoka, North Face, why have they to date not sufficiently addressed the problem? Or even like a governing body like USATF, like why in your opinion does it take something independent and new like the trail team to address and solve the problem like adequately?
Yeah, so I think there's kind of 2 pieces to it, and some are worse than others, unfortunately. But the first piece is like a lot of those brands are just a little bit too far removed. And that's why I think I'm really fortunate to be in the place I am to be in the sport. I'm an athlete that's like very serious about competing right now. But I know the elite athletes in the sport. I know the young people in the sport. I know the brands. And so I'm kind of like surrounded by all the pieces where a lot of the brands don't have that. I think like they just aren't close enough in the sport because they're not, an elite athlete competing, for instance. So they just don't, they're not in the right place. Mm. And then I think the second piece, which is like, unfortunately, it's just like maybe that's something wrong with our system, but brands are kind of set up to have an adverse relationship with athletes, for better or worse. Like just because we live in this capitalist society where like you're a marketing team and you're trying to support an athlete, it's actually to your benefit to get this athlete for as cheap as possible, to do as much marketing to sell more stuff for you. And that's really like, that's a negative. I mean, that's not the only thing, but I'm just saying that underlying motivation is adverse. And so I think what we're trying to do is the total opposite. It's friendly, it's community oriented, and we don't have an agenda to sell something. We just really are like, we love the trail community. The trail community is excited about being around each other, runners and race directors and all this stuff. So like, let's use that part and leverage that goodwill. That's what we're really doing.
I'm sure you've thought about this a lot, and it's probably a fun thought experiment to do, but I'm imagining a scenario 3 or 4 years down the road where you've had a couple years of cohorts go through the trail team program. They've picked up these skills. they've been mentored, they understand, what it takes to build a brand, to do media blitzes, all that kind of stuff. And with all of that education behind them, then they're going to go negotiate with brands and become pros for the North Face and Hoka. And it's exciting to me how much more knowledge and wisdom they'll have at their disposal before they've even entered into a contract, and what they can negotiate as a function of that, how they can navigate the system as a function of that, and how much closer they can get to their net worth as an athlete throughout their career. And I'm sure you've thought about that too, but like, I wanted to put that out there because I think it's a very fun, like, second order effect to think about from what you're building here, which is super cool.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I'd love to see a little bit of that. Like, again, I think that we're here to work with brands and work with people. And I think like developing athletes and helping identify those athletes for brands as a service for them too. So I think that's exciting. And I think that, yeah, there's just a need for a little bit more of a balance in trail running right now that empowers younger athletes. And so I'm happy that we can be a part of that.
I forgot to ask you earlier about what you're looking for in a prospective athlete. I know that you talked about the fact that they can't be entering into your relationship with a pre-existing sponsor. So talk about, in detail what you're looking for in an athlete and who should apply, how they should apply, stuff like that.
Yeah, sure. So it's a little vague, but I think it probably makes sense, hopefully, because I'm trying to share this vision. But we're looking for 20 to 30 year old athletes. We're looking for people who are ready to step up to become some of the best trail runners in the US and on the world stage. So, they need some good running experience to become elite. We're looking for people that are under-supported. And so what that means is could look different for different people, but some people might have a coach who want to join the team, and that's great. They have some support, but maybe someone who has a coach and a training group and a sponsor that helps them pay the bills is too supportive. So because we just want to do the most good with what small amount of resources we have, and so we're really just looking for these diamonds in the rough that need help. And I know there's a lot more than 6 in the country, but that's what we can start with, and we're really looking forward to helping as many people as we can in the future through growth, but also just through like building a stronger trail community.
And what does the commitment look like in full on the athlete side? So of the 6 athletes that you end up partnering with, what does it look like for each of them to be on the team? Like, what are their responsibilities?
Yeah, I think the nice thing is, so again, like they are given a lot of freedom, and I think that's just showing respect to those athletes, because I think people sometimes know what works best for them. If you're Adam Peterman, you know that living in Montana is the best. You're not like in one of these other trail hubs. So I think they're allowed to live where they want. They're allowed to have their own coach if they want. They're allowed to have their own training group that they want. We're not going to ask for any kind of social media shout outs. I think those will just come naturally with our partners and what we can do. And so the athletes are really just supported as much as possible. They're going to be, I think basically the minimum commitment would be like, we want them to use the resources we're collecting for them. So we want them to be able to actually have meaningful relationships with their mentor, whatever that looks like. So I think like being able to have calls and learn from them, and being receptive to learning to a mentor is important. Being able to come together a couple times a year doesn't need to be all the time. People might have full-time jobs and families, and I understand that. Like that's pretty relatable. So I think that a couple times a year we need to get together because that's what makes us a team. But it doesn't need to be all the time. So we're going to have maybe more opportunities to get together than are required. And that's basically it. I think kind of to your point, people who are on the team can have sponsors, and we're hoping that they do get sponsors. So we're hoping that a young athlete joins the team, has a really good season and gets sponsored at the end of the year, and they can be on the trail team and have their sponsorship. That's perfect. That's what we want. So I think that coming in under supported, getting just that little nudge that they need, and then being able to do that. Yeah.
Is there a playbook for this that you've seen done well in other sports that inspired you to try this in the trail world?
Yeah, there's nothing perfect. There's nothing that's close enough. But there are definitely some inspirations. So like one easy one is my roommate Nicole Miracle has done an amazing job with obstacle course racing, and so she has a team called the OCR Dream Team, where she's supporting, I think this year, 8 women athletes in OCR. So she's helping grow this women in obstacle course racing. So she's really cool with that, and that's a remote team, similar structure in some ways. In the U.S., I think we're missing a lot for trail running. That's why this exists as coming into existence. But I've seen a couple examples in Europe. So, for example, there's Cetus Matrix is a development team that has sponsors that are not big shoe brands, and it's the same idea. It's elite development, so it's people who are same version of what we're looking for. So I think there are a few examples, but we're hoping that more will pop up as we lead the way, because I think we're showing people that it's important, and the feedback I'm hearing is that this is important.
We've touched on a couple of them in this episode, but what are some of your biggest goals for 2023? And it could be in terms of recruitment or bringing in certain partners or a certain level of awareness in the sport. What are your biggest goals?
The funny thing is, I think I set some goals for myself for this, as I was starting the trail team, and they're already met. just inspiring people, building community, bringing the trail community together instead of apart. And so those are already happening. And I think it's so awesome to know that. Objectively, we need to get 6 athletes and help them make the jump from being under-supported and overwhelmed, and just give them a roadmap for the future and the support they need to get to races. We want to inspire younger athletes to join trail running, and older athletes, and anyone around who wants to follow us. We want to inspire them. And I think that I want to use the trail team as a platform in the future to do even more for the trail community. So that could be, it could be races and events. I think it could be camps for not the 6 athletes. I think it could be fun runs and ways to get the community together. So I think those are my main goals.
I want to end on this question because I think you're the perfect person to ask it to. In the current day, so we're talking, right around the new year, 2023, do you think it is easier to be a pro athlete at the sub ultra trail level or at the ultra trail level? Like if you go to a brand and you're saying, I'm going to specialize in the 100-mile distance versus I'm going to specialize in the VK or the half marathon, what do you think is an easier path today?
They're both really hard. So I think, I do think that the U.S. is a little bit 100-mile biased, and there's no judgment there. I think that the 100 miles is a great thing. My experience in my community is a little bit more sub-ultra. That's why it's sub-ultra. And I also think that, and this isn't for everyone, but I think there is a pathway for a lot of runners, no matter who you are, that starts with shorter distances in trail and then building to longer distances. So I don't think this isn't exclusive. I think that, we're hoping to help sub ultra athletes, but both need help for sure. There's a lot of room in the US for developmental teams.
Regardless, it's a super exciting time in the sport, and I want to salute you and everyone else working at Trail Team for having the courage and the motivation to serve a need in our sport and build something out of nothing. I wish that this year is a huge success for you guys, and it keeps gaining traction and momentum. Is there anything that you want to leave the audience with in terms of like a parting thought before we go? And I'll link to all your stuff in the show notes, by the way.
Yeah, sure. The one thing we didn't really cover is that, we're searching for our 6 elite sub ultra athletes that are 20 to 30. So our applications open on January 6th, which is really soon, and they're going to close about a month later on Sunday, February 5th. So if you are one of those people, please check us out and apply. Even if you think, oh, maybe I'm one of those people, maybe I'm not, just apply anyway. If you know someone, tell your friends, because I think we're really looking to, find the best people, but also to everyone who applies and reaches out to us. I think that there's a way that we can use that as a community, and we're going to help those people in the future. So yeah, reach out to us, connect with us, follow us on social media, please.